I spent 30 years as a probate solicitor, 30 years handling the estates of people who had died, reading their wills, distributing their assets, watching what happened to the things they had spent their lives accumulating when those lives were finally over. And in 30 years of doing that work, I witnessed something so consistent, so quietly devastating, that I feel I cannot leave this earth without saying it clearly to as many people as will listen. I am 89 years old, and this is what I watched. I watched men, and it was predominantly men, though not exclusively, who had worked with extraordinary dedication and discipline and sacrifice for 40 years, who had built businesses and investments and properties, who had accumulated wealth that their families would never need to worry about, who had provided for everyone who depended on them with a thoroughness and a completeness that left nothing materially unsecured, nothing unpaid, nothing unprotected. And I watched those same men leave estates to people who did not know them, not strangers, their own children, their own wives and partners, their own grandchildren, people who shared their blood and their name and who were, in the material sense, the complete and grateful beneficiaries of everything they had built, and who were, in the human sense, largely strangers to the person who had built it, because the building had taken everything: the hours, the attention, the presence, the conversation, the ordinary Tuesday evenings that are the actual material of a shared life. All of it had gone into the building, and the people who remained at the end had the inheritance but not the person, the provision but not the presence. Everything that could be counted and distributed and passed on through a legal document, everything except the one thing that can never be put in a will, the knowing of them. Let me tell you about Douglas. Douglas came to me, or rather, his estate came to me, in the way that estates come to probate solicitors. He had died at 68. He had been, by any material measure, extraordinarily successful. He had built a business from modest beginnings into something that employed over 100 people, had accumulated significant property holdings, had invested wisely across several decades, and had ensured, through careful estate planning that I had helped him with across a number of years before his death, that his wife and 3 children would be provided for in every conceivable material respect. The estate was one of the most complete I had ever administered. Everything in order, everything properly designated, everything that could be thought of had been thought of. What I encountered when I met with the family to begin the distribution process was something that the meticulous estate planning could not have anticipated and could not address. His wife of 40 years wept throughout the meeting, not with the specific grief of losing a person she had known deeply, in the way I had seen other widows weep, with a grief that I recognized after 30 years of watching it as the specific grief of someone mourning a stranger. She had lived beside him for 40 years. She had raised his children beside him, within the walls of the home his income had built, within the structure his provision had secured. She had loved him, I believed, but she had not known him, not truly. Not in the way that requires time and presence and the specific attention that cannot be bought or substituted or delivered through the instrument of money. His eldest child, a woman in her early 40s, said something to me during the administration of the estate that I have carried with me ever since. She said, "I do not know what to grieve. I am grieving someone I should have known and do not." And that is a different and harder thing than grieving someone you knew well and have lost. I do not know what to grieve. I have lived out those words across the years since, about what they represent, about the specific, irreversible cost of spending a working life building provision while failing to build presence, about what it means to leave an estate to people who cannot grieve you properly because the person you were never fully arrived in their lives. Douglas was not a bad man. I want to be clear about that. The men I watched do this across 30 years of probate work were not, by and large, bad men. They were, in most cases, genuinely devoted to the welfare of the people they worked for. The work itself was a form of love. The provision was real, and it was generous, and it mattered. Douglas's children would never struggle financially because of what he had built. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, something considerable. But it was not enough. It was never enough, because the thing they needed most was not the financial security which they received. It was the knowing, the years of ordinary evenings, the conversations that had not been had, the questions that had never been asked, the person inside the builder who had apparently existed because there must have been someone there, behind the building, but who had never sufficiently shown himself to the people who most needed to know him. 3 things. From 89 years of living and 30 years of reading the final accounting of how people spent their lives. First, provision without presence is not enough. I say this with full respect for the difficulty of provision. I know what it costs to build the thing that keeps a family safe. I know the hours it demands and the weight it carries and the sacrifice that genuine provision requires. I am not minimizing any of that, but I am telling you from 30 years of watching what it produces in the people who receive it when the provider is gone, that provision without presence is an incomplete gift. It gives the recipient security, but not the giver. It gives them the product of the love, but not the love itself in its most essential form, which is the specific, irreplaceable attention of one human being to another. Your children do not need you to have built more. They need you to have been there while you were building. Your partner does not need you to have accumulated more. They need you to have been present in the accumulation. The provision is important. The presence is irreplaceable. And the tragedy of the absent provider is that the provision, however generous, cannot compensate for the presence, however much it was intended as a substitute for it. Second, your children are growing right now. This is the most urgent thing I can say. It carries a specific urgency because it is happening now in real time, without pause and without the option of doing it again later. The children of the men I watched in my probate work had already grown by the time those men understood what they had missed. The window, the specific, irreplaceable, non-renewable window of a child's formation, the years during which a parent's presence or absence is being written into the person the child is becoming, had closed. The provision arrived, the estate was administered, the financial security was real and complete, and the children who received it were adults who had already formed themselves largely without their father's full presence. They were grateful, they were materially secure, and they were, in the specific way that Douglas's daughter named so clearly, grieving someone they should have known and did not. Your children are growing right now, not when your current project is complete, not when the business reaches the level that justifies slowing down, not when the financial security is fully established and you can finally afford to be present. Now, today, this week, the window of their formation is open now. It is always closing, and it will not be reopened by the estate you leave them. Third, the estate is not the legacy. This is the thing I most want to leave with you from 30 years of handling estates, because it is the thing that is most profoundly confused in the way people think about what they are building with their working lives. The estate is the material residue of the life. It is the countable, distributable, legally transferable portion of what a person built. It is real and it matters, and the people who receive it are genuinely better off for having it. The legacy is something entirely different. The legacy is what lives on in the people who knew you. It is the specific ways in which your presence, your character, your attention, your love, your teaching by living has shaped the people who grew up beside you. It is the things your children carry forward into their own parenting because they absorbed them from watching you. It is the quality of person your presence helped them become. The estate can be valued and distributed. The legacy cannot. It is simply there or it is not. In the people who knew you, or absent because they did not, most people, when they think about what they are building for the people they love, think about the estate. They think about security, provision, financial foundation, the accumulation that will protect the people they love after they are gone. The legacy, which is the more important and the more lasting thing, is built entirely differently. It is built in the evenings you were home, in the conversations you had, in the things your children watched you do and absorbed into who they are becoming. It is built in the ordinary, unrecorded, unaccumulated presence of a person who was genuinely, consistently, unhurriedly there. Douglas left a magnificent estate. He left a small legacy, because the legacy requires presence, and the presence was spent on the estate. Do not make that exchange, or if you have been making it, stop making it today. I am 89 years old. I have handled the financial aftermath of hundreds of lives, and I can tell you that the estates that were accompanied by a full legacy, the estates where the family wept with the specific grief of someone who has lost a person they knew deeply and loved completely, were not always the largest. They were the ones left by people who had understood clearly enough and early enough that the building and the being present are not mutually exclusive, and that the building, however important, does not count for much if the people who benefit from it cannot properly grieve the person who built it. Build well, build generously, build for the people you love, and be there while you build, for all of it, for all of it, for every ordinary Tuesday of it. Because the Tuesday evenings are the legacy. The estate is just the arithmetic.